Hey guys, so the World Eaters Codex has come out, and I've heard from some of you that they are quite fierce opponents on the tabletop. So today I'm going to discuss how you can approach defeating them as efficiently as possible, and what are some tactics and strategies I can recommend for that. So if you have a problem with a Khorne infestation on your home world, this is the video for you. And the first step on the path of defeating any opponent is to figure out who they are. And that's precisely what we're going to talk about now. World Eaters are quite an elite force because they are, at the end of the day, Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines. So they cost quite a lot per model. They're not a horde army. Even if you really want to, there'll still be less models in this army than in Imperial Guard army or something like that. So they are elite in their nature, and the 98% of the emphasis in the codex, all of their power lies in the fight phase. So they are a predominantly melee based army. More correct would be to say that they are one of the most potent armies in the fight phase in the entire Warhammer 40k universe, and in terms of the rules now, they can probably chew through anything you throw at them just with the sheer amount of buffs they have in the fight phase. They are very strong. You don't want to get charged by them and be close to them as well. They are dangerous in the fight phase not only because of their raw killing power, but also because of the tricks they have in the fight phase. Like, for example, fighting on death for the core units for just 1 or 2 command points, depending on which unit is doing that. If it's a troops unit, so berserkers, for example, even if it's a 10-man squad of berserkers, they will fight on death for just one command point, and that's extremely good. It will probably kill anything that has charged them. So charging a unit of 10 berserkers when your opponent has a 1 command point is a bad idea. So you probably have to figure out another way to deal with them. Also, with the blood surge ability that the same berserkers have, they can move after being shot at extra 6 inches, which means that they can get into engagement range of you, because it's not a normal move, it's a special move. It specifically says that they can get into engagement range, meaning that if you're shooting at them when they are very close to you, they can basically turn off some of your shooting units. Yes, they have to move towards the closest enemy model, but still, it means that they can change their status during the shooting phase, which is almost unheard of from other units in 40k. Usually where everything is at the start of the shooting phase, there it will still be at the end of the shooting phase, provided that the unit is still alive. Whereas in this case, they can actually hide behind a building using that move, or touch something in combat and again become ineligible for being shot at, and so on and so forth. I'm not even touching the fact that they might just touch something that you really don't want them to touch, and they will be able to fight against that in the fight phase because they are now in the engagement range, and in your turn, units that fight normally, your opponent will fight first. So not a great situation to be in. They also have access to 6-inch heroic interventions on their core and I think character units. So another way they can create problems for you, because if a unit of berserkers or terminators is standing close by, 6 inches is quite unpredictable. They can move at the moment if you forget that they have this ability where you did not expect them to. That can ruin your entire game plan. So as you can see, you have to be very careful when you're playing against them, otherwise you can get annihilated very quickly. They are also relatively fast, so obviously an army that is mostly dealing damage in the fight phase has to have an ability to actually carry that damage towards the opponent. So that's why, even though they are Marines, they have some units like 8-bound who have a 9-inch move, which is crazy. I just can't imagine them running so fast that they actually outrun a Harlequin. I think Harlequins have an 8-inch move, so they are even faster than that. That's just crazy fast. And they also have Angron with a crazy 16-inch move and fly, so that guy is also very difficult to keep at bay. So they can get in your grill pretty quickly. Also, Lord Invocatus or Invocatus, some people call him, I don't know which is the correct pronunciation. So that guy gives a +2 inches to the movement of core units around him. And for a Warlord trait, you can also get him to pre-game move 2 core units and himself before the first turn begins, after the start of the first battle round. So that's a lot of movement, as you can imagine. They are also relatively protected from the psychic powers, so they firstly have a 5-up army-wide shrug against mortal wounds available for 2 blood tithe points, and it's relatively easy for them to get those 2 points, so they will probably have the 5-up shrug whenever they are fighting against something like Grey Knights or Thousand Suns. It will be probably the second thing your opponent will do if you are fighting against World Eaters with an army like that. And they also have a 4-up Deny the Witch, which is a Khorne staple, Khorne classic. So if you have a very important psychic power, they can deny that on a 4-up for a command point. So a good set, nothing too spectacular. Obviously not like Grey Knights style with 50 denies with +1 and also 5-up shrug from mortals, but good enough. So now when we've talked at length how great World Eaters are, let's discuss their weaknesses, because that's ultimately what we are mostly interested in now, because we're trying to beat them. So firstly, their biggest strength is simultaneously their biggest weakness. They are a predominantly combat army, so much so that you will unlikely encounter a lot of shooting support from them at all, because they will probably be maxing out all their combat potential, and it's unlikely that a World Eaters player will even consider having shooting, and even if they do, that will probably be nothing to write home about. They simply don't have the platforms, the more efficient platforms for shooting that the, say, Chaos Space Marines have access to. So they have Havocs, they don't have Obliterators, they don't have Venom Crawlers, so they don't have a lot of what Chaos Space Marines have, and mostly their shooting comes from Hellbrutes, which don't have an invulnerable save, and it means that they're not very efficient, to be honest, because with like Thousand Suns, I can understand why you would run Hellbrutes. With World Eaters, I'm not sure. So Land Raiders, we all know how awesome Land Raiders are. Not the best thing, probably the best thing you have in the Codex, but not the best thing overall. So yes, they will probably not have much shooting to begin with, which in turn means that until they are right in front of you, they cannot do anything to you. Yes, they are fast, but they're not infinitely fast. They don't have advance and charge. They only have +1 to their charges. They also don't get any buffs to their pilings and consolidations. So pretty much, apart from the +1 to the charge rolls and a couple of fast options like Angron and the Lord Invocatus, who can buff up the movement slightly, their speed is quite limited. Their lack of shooting also means that when they reach your front lines, and it's up to you what those front lines are going to consist of, your big and heavy guns are still going to be safe behind your units. Obviously, keep in mind the dip strikes. The 8-bound, for example, have inbuilt dip strikes. You don't even have to worry about that stuff, and they can come in from the first turn. So keep that in mind. They have an inbuilt strategic reserves, I think. So not as good as dip strikes, but still, you have to keep in mind that and close your deployment zone from any unwanted intruders. Other than that, you can very much control where and how the World Eaters go using your screens. Also, they're not the most survivable army in the world as well. Not nearly as survivable as, for example, Iron Hands or Death Guard or even Harlequins, especially when they had their 4+ invulnerable save. And I think even now with the 5-up still. So it's relatively easy to kill World Eaters because they're basically just Marines. They don't even have a crazy combo like the Chaos Space Marines do have. They don't have all the crazy psychic powers the Chaos Space Marines have. They don't have the invulnerable saves across the board like the Thousand Suns have, and the overall survivability of the Death Guard as well. So pretty much apart from them having the 5-up and 1 on the 8-bound or 4-up if they are exalted 8-bound, and Engron being able to come back from death, they're quite easy to kill, to be honest. Obviously by the standards of the crazy overblown kill everything 9th edition. Because in 8th edition I would say that World Eaters are very strong and very survivable, but nowadays things have changed. And even though they have a lot of tricks in the fight phase, they have only one fight first ability, Battle Last Warlord trait, and no fight lasts whatsoever. And here's a small disclaimer, I don't have a copy of the codex. I'm using the information that is widely available on the internet, and I've checked it as well as I could with the stuff that I have seen from the reviews on the internet and the Bella reports. But in any case, if I say that something is not there and you know for sure that it's there, it's because I didn't have the most precise information. But probably I am right, and probably they don't have any fight lasts whatsoever. It means they cannot control the flow of the fight phase if they are fighting against someone who has these abilities, especially the fight last one, but the fight first as well. Next is, even though they can control the damage received, I meant to say in the psychic phase here, it's a typo, in the psychic phase from the mortal wounds, only having one deny is not great. Your psychic powers will likely be safe because, again, they can only deny maximum of 1 unless they are running a combination of the World Eaters and Khorne Demons, and I'm not talking about Supin here, I'm talking about a real World Eaters army, even though I understand that Supin is probably a very good way to go with them. They don't ignore modifiers to the charge rolls, apart from the Red Angel subfaction specific stratagem. So if you are running regular World Eaters, not the Red Angels, you will not have access to that. Means that all those sweet things like the Tanglefoot Grenade and the Tau -2 recharges, the inexorable stratagem from the Death Guard, all of those things will work very well to prevent the World Eaters from doing the only one thing they want to do, is getting in combat. It also means that craters and things like that are your big friend. 8. Engron is a big pain because he has a 16-inch move, which is enough to get him quite reliable first turn charges, sometimes in some conditions, not always. It depends on how well you're going to deploy and how well your opponent deploys, and his ability to resurrect once in a game. But, and this is a very important but, the Lord Invocatus' Warlord trait, because for some reason World Eaters are the only codex I know that doesn't have a way to give an extra Warlord trait to someone. So you cannot have both his Warlord trait and Engron in your army. So you are either dealing with a big angry man who can die and resurrect, or with the guy who can move up to 2 core units with him at the start of the game. Not both things at once, which is a very good thing for you as an opponent. Both of them are very nasty, and both of them you don't want to deal with, but you will not have to deal with them at once. Next is how to exploit these weaknesses, finally. So let's talk about general ideas, how I would approach fighting them. As with any melee-focused army, the key to winning the game against them is careful attention to the distances, deployment, and control of the fight phase, which means that you have to measure everything carefully. Don't go there like in the middle of the board just because there's an objective there. It's a good thing to call it objectives, but if that means that you're going to be within very easy charge distance of a squad, think about that. What will that give you, and what will then that give your opponent? Will you be able to withstand the charge of 10 berserkers? If not, then why do you go there? What are you trying to achieve by putting a unit on that objective? If you're still not going to score that in your phase, does that net any benefits to you? Maybe it does. Maybe you want your opponent to charge you there because next turn you will lose that objective, but you will bait his unit out and countercharge it. Perhaps it's up to you. I cannot predict all the things that happen in the game, but you have to think about those things. Don't just do willy-nilly autopilot mode. Oh, there is an objective there, I must put something on there because objectives win me games. That's true and all jolly and good, but you have to be careful when you're playing against something so deadly as world leaders, because you're not going to get a second chance, not likely. Deployment is basically the same thing, because you are essentially you're selecting a place for your models to start with, and that place is going to determine how far and where they can end up. So movement, and that movement is the distances that we've already discussed, why you need to keep track of those. And lastly, the control of the fight phase. So if you have an ability to control the fight phase, and what I mean by that is the ability to stop a unit from fighting next, like a fight last ability, or fighting earlier than something, like a fight first ability. And a lot of armies do have those. And if you have seen any of my videos, you know how much value I put on these things, because they actually can turn the games on their head, on whatever. They can change the outcome dramatically, because they can turn a very successful fight phase into a total disaster for someone who was planning to destroy half of your army. Just because you had that fight last in the correct moment, then you had an interrupt for 2 command points, and that's pretty much it. So 2 of the opponent's units are totally ruined for nothing. So things like that are what you can achieve if you have the control over the fight phase. And what world leaders don't want you to be able to do is control the only thing they know how to do well. For deployment, if they run Lord Invocatus, whatever, notice where that model is. What is within 6 inches of him? So what can move pre-game, and measure 22 inches if that's going to be units of 8 bound. It's going to be 22 because it's 9 plus 2 to the normal move for his ability, and then extra 11 on top of that for their next move. So measure 22 from that. See where they can end up, because they will go and charge you. There's no ifs and buts about it. Your opponent will be using that ability, so you might... You can have 2 options. You can ignore that, or you can try to do something about that. And I think the latter is the most efficient choice. You can at least control that by throwing something in front of your valuable units, and the last thing your opponent wants is to waste 400 points of 8 bound plus the Lord Invocatus on something that costs 100 points. That will be a waste, because next turn they are going to be charged, and that's probably going to be the end of them. As soon as you can, start pummeling their biggest assets with heavy guns. Obviously, keep in mind all the good stuff we've learned through the years, like if you have a plasma and you can overcharge it to get damage 3, do that, because if you're firing at a damage 3 wound target, that's going to be efficient compared to having to do 2 wounds to the target. And all the basic things, they still apply. The main thing is start doing damage from afar, because the less world leaders reach your lines, the better. They will reach you. You cannot destroy their entire army before they touch something on the board, but it's in your best interest to make that number as small as possible, because that means that you will be able to finish those little remaining units in your own countercharge. If you can bring guns, bring them. If you can bring fight lasts and fight firsts, bring them. If you can use charge modifiers, or can bring something or choose something that has that. For example, if you're thinking if you should run Inexorable for Death Guard, or maybe you want to do Martarian's Anvil for that nice Warp Insect Hive relic, select inexorable, because you will be very happy when you can subtract 2 from the charge roll of a unit of 5 or 6 8 bound. That's going to help you massively. Melee debuffing psychic powers, the same story. If you can have something again like a fight less debuff or just a melee debuff like -1 attack, consider taking that, because first of all, fight phase is very important in 9th edition, so it's not only great against world leaders, it's great against almost anything in the game. Or just if you are planning to fight against world leaders, I'm against tailoring, but yes, that's going to be helpful. That is basically your homework. Your victory and your loss both start at home when you're writing the list. And what you're going to put in that list is going to determine what happens on the table. World Eaters win when they can bring the full force of their fight phase on you turn after turn with minimal losses on their side. And your goal as their opponent, if you want to know how to win against them, is to not let them do that, and how we've just discussed. So that's it, guys. I hope now it will be easier for you to deal with our blood-loving friends from the World Eaters Chaos Space Marine Legion. And if you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.